Shabbat Shalom. And I said, happy slightly afterwards Thanksgiving. I hope that everybody had a wonderful time yesterday, because now we're going to have the quiz. What are the traditional foods for Thanksgiving? Turkey. What was that? Food. Yes, I'm looking for a little bit more specificity than that. Turkey and more turkey, apparently. Sweet potatoes. Gravy. We only getting one family that had Thanksgiving.
We didn't even eat any of those.
But you still know what's traditional. Corn and yams and cranberry sauce. Exactly right. What are the Jewish traditional foods for Thanksgiving? Kugel?
Yeah.
You have kugel on Thanksgiving?
Well, not this past one, but we've had it.
But is that like a Wiener family tradition, or is that a universal?
Yeah.
I always thought that the Jewish traditional foods for Thanksgiving were turkey and gravy and mashed potatoes and cranberry and all of the other things that you already mentioned. It's unusual because this is a holiday that doesn't exactly have a uniquely Jewish twist to it. Jews celebrate Thanksgiving pretty much like everyone else in America celebrates Thanksgiving. There are a couple of exceptions. Obviously, we're not using dairy products when we're having turkey in order to keep meat and milk separate. Means you've got power of margarine rather than butter for your mashed potatoes, but a few little adjustments here and there, but to the naked eye and certainly to the stomach, it is hardly distinguishable from any other Thanksgiving table set anywhere else in the country. And that's kind of amazing because the centerpiece of Thanksgiving, the turkey, is actually a halakhic conundrum. I sent something out on the WhatsApp link. Maybe you looked, maybe you didn't, because it's rather a long and involved story. I'm going to give you the short version, but please go back and read the fuller article on this. But by many accounts, the turkey shouldn't be considered kosher. And by many accounts, there's no reason not to consider the turkey kosher. So when it comes to fish, what makes a fish kosher? Scales and fins, exactly. When it comes to a land animal, what makes them kosher? The cloven hoof, right? I can't actually do it with my fingers because otherwise my hand would fall apart. But it goes split all the way through, not just at the one end, right? So that's why horses are not considered kosher, because they have a solid hoof, but a cow has the two pieces, cloven hoof, and it also chews the cud. Excellent. What makes birds kosher? There's a list. In the Torah, and any good Torah reader will tell you this is like a nightmare section, there is a list of birds. And as anybody who studies Torah will tell you, it's not 100% sure which species are actually being described, because it's so, well, technical. And, you know, many of you probably are not ornithologists. I imagine most of you are not ornithologists or even bird watchers as a hobbyist. And the titles for the birds may be individual species or maybe broader species. It's a little unclear how the Torah is categorizing all of them. Some of them are very obvious, and some of them were very clear, and we know from our traditions exactly which type of bird they are. But others are a little bit of a question mark. But then, if there are some birds that we're not allowed to eat, because the list in the Torah are the birds that are off the menu, and we cannot identify them with 100% absolute certainty, then how can I trust any bird when it comes time to eat? Well, in antiquity, there were two options. One option was, if he ate it, it must be okay. That is to say, tradition. That if I know that people in the Jewish community have been eating this bird since before I was born, then clearly they must have had a good reason for eating that bird, it must be kosher, and that's okay. Just carry on eating the same birds, and we're good. The alternative was the comparative anatomy that the rabbis of the ancient world did, and they looked at the birds that we were sure were off the list, that is to say, were not kosher, and the birds that were on the list that are kosher, and they tried to say, well, what are the distinguishing features between them? They said, well, if it has a clawing foot, like bird of prey with, those big talons, definitely not kosher. So anytime you come across any variety of eagle or go to the Bird of Prey Center down in Maitland, you can know that everything you're looking at, not kosher. Additionally, all of the birds that we're sure are kosher all have an additional toe, about down on the foot. They all have a crop, which is part of their digestive system, and they all have a peelable gizzard. Now, if you want to learn more about that, join me in a couple weeks' time when we begin the Mishnah on Chulin, and we're going to go through all the different rules of kashrut and see exactly some fascinating things about it. But what happens with the turkey? New world, right? There were no turkeys with Moses. Moses never got to try a turkey. Abraham never had a turkey. David never had a turkey. Rabbi Akiva never had a turkey. In fact, all the way up until around the 1500s and more likely almost into the 1600s, no Jewish person had a turkey. Well, if we're going off tradition, how does turkey become kosher? Because no one else had it. Well, you could ask a rabbi, or you could say, what's this bird called? And what's the bird called? Why is the bird called turkey in English? Because people thought it came from Turkey, the country Turkey. And other people thought it came from India, because everything weird and strange, came from over there. That was the East Indies and all that after all. So if it's some weird new bird, it probably came from there. And if it came from Turkey, well, there are Jews in Turkey and have been for a long time, and if they're eating it, it must be kosher. Turkey became kosher by mistake. That is to say, people assumed that it was kosher because of the name and the believed origin of it, and the fact that it did actually also meet the criteria. It's got the extra toe, it doesn't have a clawed foot, it has a crop, and it has a peelable gizzard. So it is, by all definitions, a kosher bird, so we're okay, we still get to eat turkey. But it kind of snuck in under the radar, and quite luckily it did, before the clampdown on changes in Judaism came a century or two later, or else we wouldn't be able to enjoy turkey at our American Thanksgiving dinners. But now, all authorities are in agreement, turkey is, in fact, a kosher bird, even if they're not 100% sure how it happened. It is kosher, we're stuck with it. But there is still a running debate about Thanksgiving. Are good Jews allowed to celebrate a non-Jewish holiday? Well, in Jewish law, there is a prohibition about adopting chukat hagoyim, the practices, the manners of the other nations. Now, how do we slice that? And it's harder than slicing turkey, by the way. How do we slice what things we can adopt and what things we cannot adopt? Now, everybody knows you can adopt some things, because after all, I'm not dressed like Abraham. Right? In fact, I am dressed very much in a style of clothing that is easily traceable back into the last 200 years of European fashion sense, even if I'm not the best example of fashion sense. And even in other communities that are more traditional, if someone puts on a furry hat for a holiday on their head and calls it a shtreimel, they are in fact mimicking the luxury items of Eastern Europe from about 200 years ago. Not Jewish luxury items, European luxury items. And Europe may have moved on, they did not, they are still using that fashion, but it is not a Mosaic fashion. It is not Abrahamic, it is not Davidic, it is a European style. And if somebody speaks Yiddish, well, that is a combination of Hebrew and German. If somebody speaks English, there was no English when the Torah was being written, and I mean that quite literally. There was no English when the Torah was being written. So what can we adopt and what can we not adopt? Because at the moment it seems like everything is on the table. Well, the basic dividing line comes down of whether or not it is a practice that is associated with a religion. of some other nation. So for example, tomorrow night in the Jewish calendar, but Sunday night when we light our Hanukkah, there will not be a Hanukkah bush to go along with the Hanukkah, because the Hanukkah bush was adopted by some people as an imitation of a Christmas tree. And a Christmas tree is a religious symbol of another faith, and thus is off limits for us to borrow. Likewise, no matter how much you may like the look of a Buddhist idol, putting it in a place of respect within your house would be inappropriate. And putting it in a place of disrespect would just be rude. So too, you may happen to think that crucifixes are just the most fashionable neckwear you could have, but as a Jewish person, we would refrain. We don't have Passover egg hunts. We do not adopt the religious practices of other cultures. And this is the distinction that has remained. When it comes to Thanksgiving, the controversy only comes because some people say, well, wait a minute. Thanksgiving implies the thanker and a thankee. Does that not mean that it is by its nature a religious holiday? It has religious undertones for sure. If I'm saying thank you, to whom am I addressing when I say thanks? Well, within the Jewish world, every time we say thank you, like we did in Psalm 100 at the beginning of our service, we are clearly referencing God. But within the holiday of Thanksgiving, is there a clear requirement that this be to God and to a particular God that might not be ours? And the answer that myself and many other authorities come to is no. Thanksgiving was first begun not by the Pilgrims, but by Abraham Lincoln, as a way of saying thank you for our nation enduring through the Civil War, and to begin to hopefully move towards an end to that dark chapter and the repair of our country. And that was not addressed to the Christian God or the Muslim God or any other God. That was addressed to the universe itself and in gratitude. We may flavor it towards our God, as we must do, but it does not mean it was born from someone else's religious tradition. It is not a Catholic rite, it is not a Protestant rite, it is not a Muslim rite, it is not a Buddhist rite, it is not a Jewish rite. It is an American rite. And each one of those religions can color and frame it as they will, but all of us can share together in it as Americans. And I personally think that is something to be thankful for. Shabbat Shalom.